Hey guys, I'm Dwayne Estes, Executive Director of the Southeastern Grasslands Initiative. And what I'd like to talk to you about today is an event that happened in 1769 here in Middle Tennessee near the town of Livingston in Overton County, about 2 hours to the northeast of Nashville. I'm here along the side of Highway 111, which runs north and south out of Kentucky down into Tennessee, almost Alabama. And this highway, while it's very busy today, sort of a large 4-lane highway, and you can hear the tractor trailers in the background. Lots of action, right? But it's important that you listen and go with me in your mind to what conditions were like well over 200 years ago. Let's step back to 1769, which was the very first year that the longhunter came into central Tennessee. Who were the longhunter? These were hunters like Caspar Mansker, Daniel Boone, some of the relatives of David Crockett, like Robert Crockett, for which this historical marker is sort of honors. These guys would leave their homes in the New River Valley of southwest Virginia, the Yadkin River Valley of northwestern North Carolina, and the Watauga and Nolichucky Valleys in northeastern Tennessee. They had already exhausted the wild game in that region. The buffalo had already begun to disappear because of the overhunting. So what did those hunters do to provide for their families? They went west over the Cumberland Mountains into the bluegrass of Kentucky, down the Cumberland River, and into north central Tennessee, eventually settling and founding places like Nashville. Along the way, in 1769 was the very first expedition of those long hunters. A group of about 20 came to a place in south central Kentucky, in present-day Wayne County, Kentucky, near the town of Monticello. And there was an open meadow that they called Price's Meadow in honor of one of the members of the party whose last name was Price. They talked about the extensive herds of elk and deer, and they set up at that time what was called a station camp. And if you're in Nashville and various places in Kentucky, you'll see that term Station Camp Creek or Station Camp. A station camp was a camp that was set up specifically to where the long hunters would bring back buffalo hides and elk hides and deer skins and beaver pelts, and they would elevate them on a big, high, elevated sort of pedestal to where we'd be kept away from wolves and raiding bands of Native Americans. And they would forage out and roam out in miles and miles in all directions. These bands of some 20 hunters would go in different directions. And this particular place at Crocketts Camp here in Overton County is a place where, as these hunters were moving south from Price's Meadow, Kentucky, down into Tennessee, in the general vicinity of where Cookeville, Tennessee is today, to the Caney Fork River at Rock Island State Park today. As they were going on this way, Robert Crockett, who was a relative of Davy Crockett, was killed in this general vicinity as he was ambushed by Indians, probably the Chickamauga Indians. Now, he was up here with Caspar Mansker. If you're from the Nashville area, the town of Goodlettsville was sort of settled first by Caspar Mansker, who was one of these long hunters. But importantly, most of these long hunters didn't have the time to read and write. They didn't have the time. They were trying to survive and trying to hunt and get back to their families across the mountains to take their hides and their pelts back over. And when they came back to the town, they were often regaled as sort of rock stars or heroes. They would come back with stories of what conditions were like back across the western side of the Appalachian Mountains. These stories are what inspired hundreds of thousands of people to move west through the Cumberland Gap between the 1790s and the 1810s. Actually, the 1780s, 1770s through the 1810s. Hundreds of thousands of people migrated down the Great Valley of Virginia through the Cumberland Gap to eventually go on to Kentucky and Tennessee. And that includes my ancestors as well. Now, since these hunters didn't stop to write down their findings, almost none of them kept journals of what they saw. It fell to the people who came later in the 1810s, 1830s, 1840s, who felt a responsibility to capture the old ways of life before these long hunters passed away. And so people like Lyman Draper at the University of Wisconsin, where his records are today, was an early historian who traveled around trying to collect these stories before they were lost to time, before people like Caspar Mansker were killed in raids by Indians. And so in doing so, they recorded some of the first histories of what this land in central Tennessee, Kentucky was like. And what they say about this particular landscape is really, really phenomenal. Here's what they say. As they were walking from Kentucky down into Tennessee, they later told historians, all the country through which we passed was covered with high grass, which seemed inexhaustible. Think about that. This whole rolling plain that is today the busy highway, it's a rolling karst plain from here south, deep into Alabama, north into Kentucky. For more than 200 miles, that plain stretches, and it's about 50 miles wide at its widest. Today, we're on a mission in this region to find lost prairie remnants hanging out on the sides of roadside embankments. So naturally, when I see this old quote, this old historical marker that links back to time, I had to stop and I had to share with you some of that information. Guys, I want you to know the Southeastern Grasslands Initiative is a science-based conservation organization. But a lot of our audience, they may not gravitate toward the science aspects of what we do. But for that reason, we're also a history-based organization. And we feel that history is a common sort of ground that a lot of us can stand on together. A lot of people can appreciate the stories of American history that have been nearly lost to time. And we enjoy bringing these stories to you. So if you like what you hear with SGI, we appreciate your time. Thank you for your support. And over and out from Overton County, Tennessee, site of the Longhunter expedition of 1769. Thank you.